So, good evening, everyone. Respected sir, ma'am, and all the participants that have joined. My name is Karthik, and I'll be today's host for the session. So, before we start the session, I would just like to make a formal announcement. All the participants who have not registered, I kindly request you all to register, and the link is to be dropped in the chat box. And now I'll just give a small introduction about what is PSA. So PSA is a student-run organization of Wilson College, and it was founded in 1992. And the basic motive of introducing PSA was we work on the interest to promote and engage political science in students, and we have been working as the most active student forum in John Wilson College. And now I would like to introduce you all to a special guest of today's session, that is Mr. Aakar Patel. He is a highly respected journalist, author, and an activist. He has written many books like Our Hindu Rashtra, Price of Modi Years, etc. He has served as the head of Amnesty International in India. So now let us begin with the session, and I would kindly request all the participants to mute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Hello, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for asking me to speak. Happy Human Rights Day, everybody. It's not a thing that is generally celebrated in our country, but it's one of the very few days that are marked across the world because the Declaration of Human Rights was deemed to be universal, and India was one of the signatories. It's an important day in the sense that I think, particularly for democratic countries like India, it's a time to reflect upon what are the rights that citizens have in terms of being able to influence what the state does. The background to India's freedom is that on the 15th of August 1947, what you and I inherited was basically a government that was almost entirely British in nature. By this I mean that the laws that the British had been operating since the 1860s transferred on to the new Indian state. The army that had been fighting for the British since the 18th century overnight became the National Army for India. I live in Bangalore, and there is a regiment here called the Madras Sappers. On their gate, they have the date, the year of their founding. It's 1780. So from 1780 to 1947, the Madras Sappers essentially were a unit that was serving the British Indian Army. So this entire apparatus overnight transferred into becoming what we call the Republic of India. If you go to Lahore or you go to Pakistan or to Karachi, if you go to Dhaka, and you say things like 302, 420, 144, they know what those numbers mean. Because the laws in all three countries remain the same even now in 2023 as they had been since the 1860s. There is very little difference in the way that these three countries conduct their criminal law. India was given a constitution where you and I have very specific rights that are under Article 19. And what these say is that we have the fundamental right to various numbers of things, but three things are particularly important. A fundamental right is defined as a right that enjoys a high degree of protection from encroachment by the state. So if you look at any kind of law or any kind of right, no right is given in absolute terms. The state, the government will always try to temper the rights we have in some way. So let us say, though it's not a fundamental right, if we look at voting, the state says, okay, you can only vote if you're more than 18. You can't vote if you're less than 18. That is, and you need to produce your ID, you need to be registered and so on. So that is the state's intrusion into your right. Voting is seen as so important that many parties want to make it compulsory. That not only do they think that this is a right we should enjoy, that every citizen above 18 should actually enjoy. Many parties, many political parties feel that this is something that should be imposed as a compulsory thing on citizens. But this does not extend to the other rights under Article 19. So the three rights I want to speak about, one is freedom of expression. So notionally speaking, you and I have the right to free speech, but in reality, that right doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for two reasons. One is that there are several laws that curb free speech in India. There is a criminal defamation, a law that the British brought here but no longer exists in Britain. It doesn't exist in Lanka either. There is a criminal contempt of court, where a judge can put you behind bars because he or she feels that what you have said offends the majesty of the judiciary or the office that they hold. We have laws like sedition, which once again the British gave us, and we have chosen not to remove it from our law books, though there has been much talk about this. There are other laws like 153A, fomenting hatred between communities. The second way in which free speech is curbed in India is through mob violence or the threat of mob violence. That I either don't say what I want to because I worry that I might be attacked, or that a physical attack has already happened on somebody who said something similar and then I choose not to say it. And this is a real threat in India. I don't think we should minimize the dangers of this. And of course, this comes out of the fact that rule of law is weak in India, that the state is not able to impose rule of law fully. And people who threaten violence, people who kill journalists. As I said, I'm in Bangalore. There was a woman here called Gauri Lankesh, who was a friend of mine, who was murdered for writing the sorts of things that she did because people didn't want her to write those things. So that is the restriction that we face on Article 19, that you notionally have the right to freedom of expression, but the state controls so much of that right that it's actually the state's right, and it devolves down to us in very small measure. In the United States, the First Amendment of the Constitution says that Congress, they use the word Congress for their parliament, what they call the House of Representatives and the Senate. Congress shall make no law that curbs things like free speech. In India, the First Amendment, which came under Nehru, says the opposite, that the government can make and will make laws as it chooses that curb the rights of citizens, you and I, to free speech. The second right is freedom of assembly. Now, India gained independence in large measure due to the fact that at some point, parties, especially the Congress and particularly the Congress, was able to mobilize large numbers of people on the ground. And in our part of the world, that's important because the state feels that once this happens, it loses control and wants to surrender. It wants to give up what it is that it has sent down by way of law. I'll give you a couple of examples. So in 2020, 2021, we saw the farmers' movement, where farmers were upset by a set of laws that corporatized farming in India and gave more rights to the corporates than they did to the farmers. They went on a dharna. About 50,000 of them came to Delhi and were there for a year. And in the end, the government pulled back those laws. Once you mobilize, once in our part of the world, in India particularly, you mobilize people in those numbers, the government will fold. The second is the Citizenship Amendment Act. For those of you who might not know what it is, India has a law which says that we will give refuge to non-Muslims who come from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan and have been here before or on December 31st, 2014. And commensurate with that, there is another law which will make sure that of the population that remains, we will filter out what we call ghuspetias, in the words of some people, termites, in the words of the Home Minister, and we'll send them to what is basically concentration camps, some of which exist in the state of Assam. And so these two laws, CAA and the NRC, will combine to form a net into which we can persecute Muslims. So this was passed in December 2019, 4 years ago. But though it is law in this country, it has still not been implemented because of the fact that large numbers of people, led by Muslim women especially, protested across India. And the world also took objection to what India was doing to its own people. And so though passed, that law has still not seen light of day. Freedom of assembly in India is severely curbed by the fact that you and I don't actually have the right to peacefully assemble, which is what Article 19 says, that we have the right to peacefully assemble, the fundamental right. What has happened is that the government now requires two things. One is it requires a permission in case you want to organize a rally or a protest or a dharna. You have to file an application to your local police station. It is the police that will determine whether or not you and I can congregate and gather. The second way in which this is curbed is that the state governments across the country have marked out specific places where you can protest and you can't go anywhere else. So Azad Maidan in Bombay, Freedom Park in Bangalore, Jantar Mantar in Delhi. If you want to have a protest, you go there. You can't do it anywhere else. In the rest of the world, in the rest of the democratic world, we can see outside corporate offices, outside government offices, outside malls and so on, people in small groups holding up placards saying, we don't want this, we don't want that, You can't do that here. You go straight to jail. So though the right notionally exists, and it's a fundamental right, the right really resides with the state here as well. The third right, also under Article 19, is the right to association, that we have the fundamental right to freedom of association. What that means is that we can freely form bodies and operate those bodies. And those bodies tend to be things like the Rotary Club, colleges and universities, whatever would form civil society, that if we are within the law, we can formulate rules and build an institution which we can run freely. The problem here is that the government of India has two different sets of laws for the private sector. One is for the corporate sector, which has almost no restrictions in how it raises and manages and spends foreign funding. The second is the private sector, where both the raising and the spending are severely restricted. I'll give you an example. So let's say there is an NGO that raises, say, 1 crore rupees in foreign funding and is working on something. Let us say it's working on education. The law says, firstly, that no matter where that NGO is located, it could be located in Bangalore, it could be located in Manipur, it could be located in Kashmir, it could be located in Chennai. It has to operate that money through one branch of one bank in Delhi. It's a State Bank of India branch. So it doesn't matter where you are. You come to Delhi, you open the account there, you operate the money in that account from there. This is not a restriction that's on any other part of the private sector. It's only on the NGOs that use foreign funds. Second, the law says that 80% of the money that the NGO raises cannot be spent on what the government calls administrative expenses. So all salaries, all travel, all rent, all lawyers' expenses have to be taken care of by that 20%. This is not a restriction that the government imposes on the rest of the private sector. Ambani, Adani are not told when they raise foreign capital that you can spend it only in this way and that way and you can't spend it here. The third way in which there is a restriction is that if two NGOs, both of which have licenses to raise money abroad, but one is working in the city and another is working with the grassroots, one cannot give money to the other, even if both have licenses. So you can't have a connect. Now, NGOs tend to not be competitive like the rest of the private sector. They tend to be cooperative and they work with one another. But this restricts and pretty much ends any kind of cooperation that they can have with one another. And once again, this is not something that the rest of the private sector is subjected to. Broadly speaking, this is the problem in terms of what our fundamental rights are and how it is difficult to be able to exercise them. Let me move to the subject of why it is that we should be able to exercise them. Why should we need to use our fundamental rights? Why do we need free speech? Why do we need freedom of peaceful assembly? Why do we need freedom of association? Well, one is that democracy does not begin and end with the vote. If we look at, there is a think tank in Washington called Freedom House. For the last few decades, it has published a report every year on the state of freedom in various countries. So obviously, on the face of it, some countries will be not free. North Korea is not free, China is not free, which is a fact. 4 years ago, India was for the first time marked partly free, not fully free, which might surprise those of us who say, oh, we are a democracy, we have the right to vote. Our government is democratically elected. We have an opposition. So what's the problem? Freedom House does not deny any of this. It accepts this. It has its report breaks freedom into two parts. One part for which it gives 40% weightage is on the electoral process. Do Indians have the right to freely form political parties? Do Indians have an independent election commission? Can individuals vote? Are elections conducted freely and fairly? On all of these, Freedom House says yes. It gives India 4 out of 4 in most of these categories, and therefore India does really well in this 40% weightage. In the 60% weightage, Freedom House looks at individual freedoms. Do Indians have the right to free speech? Do Indians have the right to peacefully assemble? Do Indians have the right to freedom of association? Here, India doesn't do well. It barely passes, like 1 or 2 points over passing grade. And this is 60% of the total 100. So there is more weightage given to individual freedoms than it is to the democratic, what we would call the democratic process, but is actually only the electoral process. Why have we begun to fail on this count? This is something for us to ask ourselves. The government denies that there is a problem. It does not respond. It either does not respond to such reports when they come out, or it tends to discredit them, saying that this is a foreign agenda. These people have something else to know. If we were to leave aside that and examine what it is that these bodies are saying, and Freedom House is not the only one. There is a very conservative magazine called The Economist, which has something called the Economist Intelligence Unit, whose findings are pretty much the same as those of Freedom House. There is another study also published annually by the University of Gothenburg in Sweden called the V-Dem Index, which also finds the same pattern, that there is increasing levels of authoritarianism in India, and we are moving away from democracy. How can we demonstrate that this happens? We can say, oh, I mean, there will always be two views about something, including a member of parliament being expelled. One side might say it's for this reason, one side might say it's for the other reason. There are some things that are not disputable. So I'm saying I would like to focus on those things. Are there things that we have done to ourselves, to government, which are not disputable, which can be seen from the outside as a sign of India moving away from its freedoms, moving away from human rights, and towards something that's a little different? So I spoke about the CAA law, which violates, to my mind, at least two fundamental rights. One is Article 14, and one is Article 15, which was the right, which give every person. That's what 14 says, that every person and 15 says every citizen. So even if you are not a citizen, Article 14 gives you rights that hold true for this country, which the CA does not respect. I've been a journalist many years, for at least 2 decades. I did not hear of this category of violence called the beef lynching. A beef lynching, like somebody who's attacked and sometimes killed for the accusation that this person has got beef either in their possession or their van or their fridge. This began in 2015. So in 2015, after a series of speeches made by the Prime Minister against what he called the Pink Revolution, which referred to the export of meat from India, 2 states, your state, Maharashtra, and then Haryana, they passed laws which criminalized the possession of beef, and they reversed the burden of proof. I hope you understand what reversal of burden of proof means. It means something quite simple, that if I'm with a smoking gun in my hand and there is a dead body next to me, it is the police's job to prove that I killed this person. When you reverse burden of proof, it is for you to prove that the meat that you are accused of keeping in your fridge or in your van is not beef. And I'll give you an extreme example of this. You can find the story reported in the Indian Express. This is from 2019. A man in Gujarat, a Muslim man, was accused of serving beef at his daughter's wedding. The police told the court they were not able to prove that this was the case. They had no idea that what had been consumed was beef. The court sentenced the man to 10 years in jail, saying it was his job to show that what had been consumed all those days and weeks and months earlier was not beef. Since he could not do so, obviously, he got a 10-year sentence. This sentence was later reversed by the High Court, by the Gujarat High Court. But what the judge did was right, because that is the law. The law does say that it is for the person to prove, once the accusation is made, it is for the person to prove that the meat that he's accused of having or she's accused of having in their fridge or van is not beef. Beginning in 2018, 7 states in India, including my state here, Karnataka, have criminalized the marriage between Hindus and Muslims. So if a Hindu wants to marry a Muslim, and one of them wants to change their faith for this marriage, they have to fill out an application form and give it to the government. And the government will decide whether they can go ahead and marry or not. In some states, including Madhya Pradesh, the government has the power to undo the marriage, including if the marriage has children. So if the government comes to your house and finds out that you're married, you've got children. If the government thinks that a conversion was coerced, the word coerced is very vague, it can undo the marriage. Here again, the burden of proof is reversed. An adult woman's testimony that she is converting out of free volition is not acceptable evidence to the state. It is for the person she's marrying and the family she's marrying into, the members of that family, that have to prove, that have to show to the satisfaction of the state that there was no coercion involved. These are new laws. This law is quite similar to what was called the Nuremberg laws in Germany in the 1930s, where the marriages of Christian Jews was forbidden. So that is what is happening in India after 2018. In 2019, Muslims became the only community in India for whom divorce became a criminal offense. For the rest of us, it is a civil offense. So the Supreme Court said a couple of years before that the delivery of triple talaq in one sitting was invalid. So if a Muslim man were to say to his wife, say these 3 words, talaq, 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 in one sitting, they would not be divorced. If he said the words 3 times over a period of 3 months, then it would be valid, and it is still valid. But said in one sitting, it would not be valid. After that, the government passed a law in 2019 which said that the utterance of these words would be a crime, even though they would not be a divorce. What this means is this, that if I am accused of saying to my wife the words talak, 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 we are not divorced and it is not a crime. If a Muslim man is accused of saying these three words to his wife, they are not divorced either, but it is a crime. The only reason why it was criminalized, the utterance of these three words, is that there is a desire in the Indian state to persecute a specific part of the people, particularly minorities, particularly Muslims, I should say. In 2020, there is a law. This is the law is old. It goes back to the Congress era. But there is a law in Gujarat called the Ashandharo, Disturbed Areas Act. What it means, what it says is that in Ahmedabad or Surat, I'm from Surat and I studied in Baroda. But in Baroda or Surat or Ahmedabad or Rajkot or Junagadh or wherever else in Gujarat, if a Hindu wants to buy, rent or lease a property to or from a Muslim, or a Muslim wants to buy, lease or rent a property to or from a Hindu, they have to file an application. They have to file an affidavit that reveals their religion, and the government decides whether that rent, lease or sale goes through. In effect, foreigners can rent and buy properties in the cities of Gujarat where Gujarati Muslims cannot. And the reason this law exists is to ghettoize, to forcibly ghettoize Muslims and keep them in particular parts of the city fixed and not let them leave those parts. There is an option for the citizen, for groups to challenge these laws, that you can move the court and say my rights under Article 14 have been violated, or Article 15, or any other part of the Constitution for that matter. But it appears to me to be the case that the judiciary is quite slow or maybe unwilling to act on these things, which is why these laws exist. There is no reason to my mind why CAA should have been passed 4 years ago and still not be determined as being either illegal or legal by the Supreme Court. It was challenged immediately, but 4 years later, here we are. The Ashandharo, this Gujarat law that I told you about, is decades old, but has still not been heard fully and struck down or upheld by the Supreme Court. Similarly, the Triple Talaq law, which was passed in 2019, 4 years ago, no sign that the Supreme Court will hear and determine its constitutionality soon. There are sort of other instances. I don't want to give too many examples because we'll be moving away from the core of what we have to discuss, which is human rights. But we can look at some things. So, for instance, pellet guns, which is a rather kind of a friendly word for what is a 12-gauge shotgun firing bird shots. So if you've seen James Bond films or other films where you see people doing pull and then there is a pigeon that goes and people shoot it. That is what a shotgun is, that it fires steel pellets, hundreds of them, out of an unrifled barrel. And there is no control over those pellets once they leave. They have injured people, including the security forces that fire them, and they've blinded more than 1,000 Kashmiris, including infants who've been not anywhere close to the site of the protest because it's not a controllable weapon. It's not a weapon used anywhere else in this country. It's reserved for the Kashmiris. Similarly, if we look at how it is that laws like UAPA are used, or PSA, there is a law in Kashmir called the Public Safety Act. It gives the state the power to do what is called preventive detention. So in India, every state, including your state, Maharashtra, my state, Karnataka, and Gujarat, and every state, they have laws which say that the police can jail you without a crime having been committed. There is no crime. The police suspects that there might be a crime in the future, and to prevent that crime, they put you in jail. They can put you in jail for 6 months, and because there is a revolving door policy, once you're out after 6 months, they can put you back in again. You can stay indefinitely. This is similarly true of laws like UAPA, where you can be jailed without there having been a crime. Should we have such laws on our book? I would say no, that the citizens should not be, individuals, humans should not be subjected to this kind of law by the state. If we remember Jallianwala Bagh, what was the Jallianwala Bagh protest about? The protest was about people who were opposing a very similar law to this. That the British government was saying that without a crime being committed, we will put you in jail and keep you in jail. The British, in fact, withdrew that law. That law was not actually implemented, what is called the Rowlatt Act. So we are doing to ourselves what we didn't do even in the British period. And I think that that's something of concern, particularly given the fact that, as I said, I don't think that there is too much pushback from the judiciary on this, on the intrusion of the state into our rights, your rights and my rights. And I think that this is not really the subject of popular political opposition, because all parties tend to do the same thing when they're in power. So it's not about one party alone. Even if we think that one party has exaggerated or amplified what has happened, which is true to my mind. But in the absence of this pushback from the political framework and from the judiciary, it is for the individuals, you and I, to be able to stand up for our rights. We have to write, we have to speak, we have to tweet, we have to meet, we have to gather and ensure that these rights that belong to us truly, constitutionally, are kept as sacred and free from state intrusion as they were originally designed to be, but no longer are. So I'll stop here, and maybe we can either have a discussion or I can answer questions if you have any. There is a second part to what I have to say, which is on the side of the economy, and maybe we can go there if there are no questions. Thank you.
Yeah, if you have questions, can kindly raise your hand and then I'll announce your name and you can ask the question to sir. Participants, anyone wants to ask any question to sir, they can kindly raise your hands. Yes, Ruchi, you can ask.
Hello, sir. Sir, this is Ruchi from SYBA from Wilson College. I just wanted to ask you that, sir, your perspectives on current human rights challenges globally and your organization's initiatives. And apart from that, sir, your thoughts on the role of media in promoting the human rights awareness. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I'll start with the last one. So there is a structural problem in India's media. So I've been a journalist for many decades myself, so I sort of understand why it is that we have reached where we have. One reason is that there is very significant amounts of government involvement in the media. So the government, the union government, the central government, has 2,400 crore rupees available to it to spend in discretionary terms. It can give it to whichever media company it wants every year. So that's 200 crore rupees a year. If you don't behave, if you don't follow, if you don't toe the line, that money stops coming. So when Vasundhara Raje was the chief minister of Rajasthan, the Rajasthan Patrika, which is the largest newspaper in the state, had gone to court to say that because they were opposing what the government was doing, the government had stopped sending advertising to it. And because the cover prices in our part of the world for newspapers are very low, 2 rupees, 3 rupees, 5 rupees at the most, and the cost of making a newspaper is about 15 rupees, advertising picks up most of the slack or all of the slack. So newspapers depend on that to be able to function. So that is a structural problem that we have. The other issue is the stick. So the carrot is the money that the government can give out. The stick is the denial of licenses. So maybe the most reputable television journalist in India is a man called Raghav Bahl, who set up Network 18, who worked with the BBC. He was denied a license to set up his own channel, and the reason given was a security threat, that he was seen to be some kind of security concern, which obviously he's not. But this is the arbitrary fashion in which the government can deny people access to being able to operate their media systems. There is a third reason, which is that I think that, especially with Mr. Modi, Hindutva, which is majoritarianism, has become popular. That what was said in whispers in drawing rooms earlier is now said openly. That we can call open season on our minorities, and it's not really a problem, which is new. I'm 54 years old. I have not seen this. I think that this is a new thing for us and for our country. We've not faced this sort of thing before, where the country is being divided internally based on law and policy and rhetoric, and there is very little pushback from the media because it sees the thing as being popular. To your question about the rights of people in the world and what the state of human rights in the world, I think that things are better than they used to be. So if we look at it from the short-term lens, things always tend to be either confusing or look bad. So right now, thousands of people are being murdered every week in Gaza. You've got many countries that are under dictatorial rule, including China, South Korea. You've got laws that are, you have the death penalty in almost all of the Arab states. In Iran, you have the penalty where people can be stoned to death. Pakistan also has that law on its books, but it has never actually stoned anybody to death in its history. And various other things. You've got mistreatment of women across the world. You've got exclusion of people across the world. So that is the short-term reality that we are in. But if you look at it from the long point of view, let's say if you look at it from the 150-year point of view, 150 years ago, there was legalized slavery in the US. India was not independent. Nobody in India had the right to vote, obviously. In large parts of Europe, women did not have the right to vote. In the United States, women didn't have the right over their own body. Abortion was not legal. But we have won on these issues in time. So slavery was abolished. India became independent. Women got the right over their own bodies in many countries. Gender equality, marriage equality is coming across the world as well. The death penalty has been abolished by most countries. Sadly, not here. But if you look at it from that point of view, from that framework, there is a lot of improvement. And we should be glad for that, but we should also be impatient for change in our time. That we should not feel that we have to wait another 150 years before all humans get rights equally. And particularly, we should be alert to the fact that rights that we have already won are not taken away from us. I sense a sense of a sort of feeling of regression in India, that we are moving away from institutional and structural values away. And I think that that's quite dangerous. Lastly, so far as amnesty is concerned, it has a lot on its plate. So it operates on the UN model. So there is a secretariat that sits in London, but each country runs its own operations. Just like India has a representative in the UN, but what happens in India is run by the government of India. So our concerns tend to be things like demolitions. So one thing we didn't speak about is that after 2018, 2019, India began to use bulldozers without any kind of process or law. So if it's suspected that there was a problem in a neighborhood, they would come and demolish homes and shops, usually of Muslims. And this was told to courts as not being punitive action, but merely because it was not legal or not unauthorized. But that same thing is not extended to unauthorized colonies across and the constructions across the country, particularly of the middle class and the wealthy. So it's not a valid reason. But these are the sorts of things that we are working on. Pre-trial detention is a big one. Kashmir is one. UAP obviously is always the problem in India, no matter which government is in power. These are the various things that we work on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruchi, for the question.
Thank you, sir. There's one more question, Abhimanyu. So if you are ready with your question, you can please ask.
Yes, sir. Hello, my name is Abhimanyu Amarkant from Wilson College, FYBA. So, the solution you provided for us who have a voice is to continue to use that voice, to continue tweeting and speaking. But what about the people who are persecuted in India who don't have an outlet? Like we've seen in other countries when a huge amount of people are persecuted and their human rights are compromised, but they don't have a way of speaking out. It leads to violence and all kinds of destructive things. So how can the people who don't have a voice healthily protest against this persecution?
That's a great question, Abhimanyu, and thank you for asking it. So the preamble to our constitution has a word, and the word is fraternity, bandhuta. We are obliged by the constitution to speak up for those people who can't speak for themselves or find it difficult to speak for themselves. We need to develop a sense of fraternity, and rights, speaking about rights works best when all of us speak for the rights of other people. Everybody wants to collect and gather and protest when it comes to issues that affect directly their lives. But we should be a society, we should be a world where we are willing to stand up for those who are unrelated to us, either in terms of what they are going through or in any other way. And I think that the only way for this to happen is when people like you and I, who have a voice, use it for those who don't. And as I said, the Constitution obliges us through the use of the word fraternity in the preamble, and it encourages us to do exactly that.
Thank you, sir.
Any other participant is interested to ask any question? Kindly raise your hands. Thank you so much, sir. As we have completed the major part of the session, I myself would like to ask you a question. My name is Karthik. I'm from FIBA. And sir, as we are like an evolving, like a developing nation currently, so there are many developed countries in the world like US, like Russia and other people. So the thing is that when human rights are seen as a major factor in today's world, people who are deprived of human rights and want to seek their human rights but are not aware what actually their rights are. So how can we take a step to spread awareness for that?
It is my experience that people who are oppressed generally know their rights quite well. I went to Raigad, which is a place in Chhattisgarh where they were doing where coal mining happens, and there is a law we have which I didn't discuss called the Coal Bearing Areas Act. What it says is that if the government determines that there is coal under a particular piece of land, that land is acquired without any agency for the person or the community that owns it. Now, if land were to be found under Kolaba, if coal were to be found under Kolaba, do you think the government would go and ask the residents to vacate and start to take that? Of course it wouldn't. It would not dare. It does this in the Adivasi areas because it feels that it can bulldoze over them and their rights without any kind of pushback or without any meaningful pushback. But when I went there, what I found was that the Adivasis did know their rights. They were prevented physically by the police, by the state, by the contractors from being able to exercise their right to defending their lands. In some instances, they were successful. In some, they were not. But if you look at, say, Dalits, particularly in the south where I live, their knowledge about the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, Atrocities Act and what powers it gives them is quite strong. If you look at Dalit communities, including in Bombay, their understanding of how to get a reservation certificate, how to apply, and how to get, they are really sorted. They don't. I think the issue is making sure that those laws are in place and making sure that the state acts properly and there is a pressure on the state to act properly when it doesn't. I think that all human beings are smart enough to understand what is in their own interests, and they tend to figure it out on their own.
Thank you so much, sir, for that answer. And if anyone wants to ask question, you can. And if not, then I'll move towards the other part of the session, that is the vote of thanks. So, sir, we are very thankful to you for giving us your precious time and the session.
Just a minute.
which we had.
Just a minute. Sir had something to some framework on economy. So maybe if we can also discuss that part of the talk and then maybe move to the last.
Okay. Firstly, thank you all 47 of you for joining on a Saturday. I'm quite surprised that you took this interest. So there's a book I wrote recently. It was updated this year on where we stand economically. I'll be slightly brief, but I'll try to put in as much data as I can. Basically, when other Asian nations came out of where we are today and became prosperous, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, to some extent China, they were doing something very different from what we have been doing in the last 30 years. So in 1991, when what we call liberalization happened, India was slightly ahead of China in per capita GDP terms. We were around $370 per person. They were at around 340. Today, they are 5.5 times ahead of us. We are at about $2,400. They are at about 12,500. So the gap, not only have they caught up with that gap that they had, they've gone up 5.5, 6 times in front of us. In 2019, Bangladesh went in front. Today, the average Bangladeshi citizen, man, woman, and child, is wealthier than the average Indian. And Bangladesh did this in 2019 when they went past India, and they've remained past India in the last 4 years. And it's unlikely that we will be able to catch up in the near future. We were significantly ahead of them in 2014. So it's not as if they've been catching up from the time that the country was born in 1971. They have caught up in the recent past. So clearly we're doing something wrong. Secondly, when Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan became these wealthy economies, at the point when they were at our level, $2,400 nominal per person per year, they were growing at double digits for decades. So they were growing at 10%, 11%, 12%, 18% even over 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. We've never done that. And the problem with not doing that is that if you're not able to do that, you get caught in what is called the middle income trap, that you remain in the $8,000, $10,000, $9,000 bracket where you don't have access to the most sophisticated parts of the economy, and very large parts of the population don't have jobs. So today there are fewer Indians working than there were in 2017. So what is called the labor force participation rate, it says that it counts the number of people over 15 years of age who are either working or not working. So you're either working, you're studying, or you're not working, or you're looking for work. So if you're not studying, if you're not looking for work, and if you're not working, that means there's a serious problem. It means that there is no work available for you. So in India, the number of people who, in the US, the labor force is 61% of the population. 61% of US citizens who are either who are 15 or more than 15 are either looking for work or they are working. This includes the number of people who are in college or in school. In China and Vietnam, this number is over 70%. In India, it's 40%. Did not have to have a specialized degree because there were so many opportunities for those people who were privileged, like I was, and had some knowledge of English. That is not the case anymore. You can't just walk into a random place with basic knowledge of English and get a job that will get you set for life. You could 30 years ago, you can't anymore. Manufacturing's share of GDP in India has fallen from 16% in 2014 to 13%. So we are making fewer things as a whole, a proportion of the GDP than we were in 2014. Why is that? Because we are not able to attract the manufacturing jobs. And the target of the government was to make it 25%. Instead, it has fallen over the last 10 years. the number of people who are dependent on Manrega has grown. It's the budget is 4 times what it was in 2014. So we wanted to end Manrega because we felt that we would make really good jobs that people would get. That is not only has that not happened, the more people are dependent on Manrega. Now that for the first time in India's history, last year and this year, more people went to work in agriculture over the previous period. So more people are now working on farms, doing farm labor and so on than they were in 2019, which is the first time it's happened. And the reason that economists think this is true is that they feel that it is a proxy for no work. That when the surveyor goes to the house and they ask, "Do you have a job?" and this person says, "No, I work on the farm." Basically, it means that they don't have any work. In the US, the agricultural part of the economy employs 2% of the population, but here it's more than 45%. What that means is one farmer in the US feeds herself and 50 other people. In India, one farmer feeds herself and only one more person. So if you don't have productivity levels beyond that, you're not going to be able to escape poverty, which is the reason why we've remained so dependent on free grain. 60% of our population gets 5 kilos of free grain every month, which they need, and I think one reason is that we've not been able to create the kind of economy and the kind of jobs that we want. Lastly, I'll say this, that the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, which is based in your city, in Bombay, it conducts a survey every 2 months in 19 cities. It goes to people and says, "Are you better off today?" Today is the 10th of December, 2023. "Are you better off economically today than you were 1 year ago on the 10th of December, 2022? Since January 2017, which is 7 years ago next month, the majority of Indians have said no, they are not better off. So except for one period, which is April, May 2019, for all those 7 years, Indians have said they are not better off now than they were last year. Last year, they said they are not better off that year than the year before that. So clearly there's a problem. And this is government data. Nobody actually denies it. But the thing is that if I don't acknowledge a problem, if I have a hole in my pajama and I don't acknowledge that I have a hole in pajama, I'll keep walking around. I won't care. I can only fix that hole if I accept to myself that there is a hole in my pajama which I need to fix. Right? If I don't acknowledge, what the heck? Who cares? We are in that state right now. That we are the fastest growing economy. We are this. We are that. We've got the bullet train coming very soon. We were the G20 president, which we are not anymore. But if you focus on such things, you will never be able to fix the real issues, whether they're on the side of the economy or on the side of human rights.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for answering that and putting light on the thing which sir has asked you. Yes, Joe, you can ask a question. Kindly unmute your.
Yes. Hello, sir. I've been following your work since a while. I'm a former student of Wilson College, so very happy to be here. I just wanted you to throw some light on this accelerated central policies that the government has started giving out, ever since the BJP has come into power, and how the states have not, especially the southern states, have not really benefited from it, but are always in a dilemma, because if you do not activate on these policies, okay, then they will not get the funding, and so that dilemma. And secondly, also, if you could comment on how I started noticing that Tamil Nadu has been kind of raising their voice against the tax, that only 30 rupees of the 100 is coming back to them. But notice that Karnataka is really also not kind of being very vocal about it. Do you see any future resolution to that? Because state-wise, they have been really doing well, but these are the determinants that, that's actually kind of stopping them from really becoming more and more, independent in some ways to manage their own economy. If you could just throw some insights on that.
It's a good question, and it has been troubling a lot of people. So there are structurally, the problem has been that when Mr. Modi became the PM, he abolished the Planning Commission, which was the link between the center and the states. So that was replaced by this thing called the Niti Aayog, which is basically a think tank. It doesn't replace the work of the Planning Commission. It only does some new stuff. And therefore, the states have felt that loss. The second part is that when GST came in 2016-17, what GST did was it took away the right of the states to tax, to taxation. Basically, today, except for alcohol and fuel, petrol and diesel, states don't have the right to tax what is produced and sold in their regions. And they don't have the level of autonomy that they did before 2016-2017. And this is a problem. This is a problem because, as you say, it slows down their move to improve the lives of their own people. It gives excessive authority and power to the union. And I foresee that this being something that will not go away easily, particularly when you tie it with delimitation. So the last time we had delimitation was in 1971 after the census then. But if you look at the 1971 census, in, let's say, in Kerala, the number of Kerala had fewer seats in the Lok Sabha, 21 seats, I think it is. But each of those seats had pretty much the same number of constituents voting as the 84 seats in UP and Uttarakhand then, which was then one state. That is no longer the case. Now, one MP from UP represents far more people than one MP from Kerala. So there is a genuine problem that you should have some kind of equality. But the problem is that if you were to enforce that equality, the South would feel very anguished because they already feel that they are being marginalized through this problem of taxation, of the fact that they are being punished more or less for the fact that they've been able to control their populations better and more effectively than the North. So this is something to think about. I think that this is a problem that we will leave for your generation. That I think that because we are blind to it at the moment, we don't really give it much thought. We've given you a core, and hopefully your lot, when you are our age, will be able to bring some wisdom and solve it. But it's a really deep, really problematic issue which needs to be addressed, and it's not being at the moment.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, participants, any other questions anyone would like to ask, sir? Yes, Tanmay, you can ask the question. Go for it.
Hello, sir. My name is Tanmay Ambekar, and my question to you is, in terms of economic disparity, where a few % of the population in India has a control over resources and is exploiting marginalized sections, how do you see the discourse of human rights?
It's a very serious issue. I think that so I'll give you some data on this that some people might not know. That though China's economy is 5.5 times bigger than India's, the two richest Asians are Indian men, Adani and Ambani. Though India's economy is smaller than Germany's, India has more billionaires than Germany. The share of corporate profit in GDP went from 1.5% in 2018 to 4.5% now. It's become 3 times bigger. So in a sort of economy which is not growing much, a larger share is shifting towards the corporates, and a very large share is shifting towards the wealthiest. India's share, the crony capital, the Economist magazine runs an index called the Crony Capitalism Index, which measures how large a part of your GDP is controlled by crony capitalism. And by crony capitalism, it means businesses that function on extractives like petrol, coal, running ports, and so on. And it's gone up from 4% in 2016 to 8% now. It's doubled. So you're seeing this accumulation of wealth, enormous wealth, at one end of the spectrum for a very few handful of people, mostly from my community. and you've got tens of crores of people living in real extreme poverty. And of those, obviously, the marginalized are the worst hit, because in a society that is biased and bigoted and caste-ridden, you will find disproportionate levels of pain and suffering in those parts of the population that come from Dalit, Adivasi, minority Muslim communities. This is something that we have to address. I think that this is when Manmohan Singh tried to address it. He said that these groups have the first right to the resources. There was anger against what he said, but why should there be? Because it's a fact. We should make sure that Indians concentrate what little we have to make sure that the lives of those who suffer most are alleviated in some way, their pain is alleviated in some way. But once again, you can only solve something if you acknowledge that there is a problem. If we celebrate the fact that we have the two richest men in Asia, and we're not ashamed of the fact that this has happened in a smaller economy than Germany's, that this has happened in an economy that is 1/5 the size of China's, then we'll never solve it. We'll sort of continue down this road, not going anywhere, not becoming the next Taiwan, not becoming the next South Korea, not becoming the next Japan, but be happy in doing our TV debates, persecuting our own people every night, and celebrating this.
Yes, Anushka, you can ask a question to the sir. And sir, after that, if you're comfortable to continue, we can.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Anushka Yadav, and I'm from TY. So I have a question regarding the economy that you mentioned. So, do you think that our education system here in India as well, in some way, has hampered the kind of economy we have? Because I mean, students currently, I mean, there are a lot of people here can relate to this, where we as students agree to this, that the education abroad is way more better, or way more diverse than what we have here, and that also can be a reason why your economy is being hampered. So what are your views on that?
I'm sure part of it is that, Anushka, that part of it is the fact that we haven't been able to produce good quality schools, especially for those people who can't afford very high-end private schools. I grew up in Surat, and it was a city then of 25 lakh people. There were 4 English schools there. 3 of them were run by missionaries, Lourdes, Xavier's, and Seventh-day Adventists, where I went. One was run by Parsis. My own community did not even have one school. We did not feel it important to put in our own money into sort of educating our own people. There's a good chance that if you find somebody who speaks English well in India, that person probably came from a Catholic school. That person probably went to a school that was set up by missionaries or set up in some form. But if that doesn't change, if we only look at education as a source of income and wealth, if we only want to set up colleges that are private which charge 20 lakh rupees a year as fees, we'll never get a good education system. I spent 1 year in school in the United States. The public education there is free, but the quality was very high. There were no fees. Of course, they have very expensive universities, but to get through school, to get a proper, decent working job, you don't need more than that. They taught you how to operate a lathe machine. They taught you how to drive. They taught you maths, physics, chemistry at a fairly competent level. So this is a failure of our society. I don't want to blame the government for this. I mean, who will we blame if we don't have good schools, if we don't run good schools, if we are dependent on the Christians in Bombay and Surat to set up good schools, while we can't set up good schools ourselves? Who should we blame? But I would definitely say that it is one of the reasons why we haven't done as well. There are actually other reasons as well, but certainly this would be one of them.
Thank you so much, sir.
Anybody else wants to ask a question? Or if you don't want to speak, you can just put the question in the chat box. I'll read it for you. Okay. So, keeping the time in consideration, I'll say that we have finally come to an end for this beautiful session. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us your valuable time and sharing your experiences with us. And it was a very enriching session for us, and I guess it was for everyone who was present. Now, I would like to thank everyone who came, like all the participants. Principal of John Wilson Education Society, Dr. Professor Anna Pratima Nikalje, Coordinator Radhika Birmole, Vice Principals Anuradha Painse, Dr. Ashish Usgare, Dr. Ajita Kumar, a department in charge and teacher in charge of Political Science Association, that is respected Purnima Kadam ma'am, faculty of the department, Anmol sir, and the organizing committee, and all the participants who showed up today, that too on a Sunday evening, especially. And thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone who came for this.